Hey, everybody, if you have not yet visited thechurchcrew.com, Bethlie and I highly recommend that you do.
Yes, we do.
As we travel the country, one of the things we've noticed in local church is that getting volunteers all on the same page. Everything from the nursery to the grounds crew to the cleanup
hospitality crew.
If you take the time to download this program and put all of the information in, put everybody's schedule in real time, people can make changes themselves on the app, and then immediately it updates everybody. It finds replacements. It is well worth it, and it is highly affordable.
Yes.
Just incredibly well done and very affordable, very easy to use, and I think anybody in your church can use it. So if you have anything to do with volunteer staff in your church, thechurchcrew.com is the app for you.
Yes.
So check it out. We're very thankful for their support and their partnership with the Keeping It Young podcast.
Yes.
And just let them know how thankful you are when you log in and check them out as well. That's thechurchcrew.com. Welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethlie.
And we are the Youngs.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the continuation of our series on turning 30 years and making them happy years.
30 years into a great marriage.
Is that what the title is?
That's what this is. Turning 30 years into a great
There we
marriage.
go.
There we go. And we just celebrated 30 years in August, and we just were away in Alaska. It was a wonderful trip. What was your favorite part of our Alaska trip?
Really having you to myself for 13 days.
Wow.
But it is gorgeous, and I don't even know how to explain how gorgeous it is. It's just, the scenery is absolutely beautiful.
Just phenomenal.
We have an amazing creator God.
Yes, we do. And it's just incredible to have been there and to enjoy all the sights. And while we were there, one of the things that I began thinking about was, how did we do this? We're happy. All is well. We've enjoyed being married. We're still happily being married. And we've enjoyed sharing, lessons about marriage. But, what is it that specifically helped us to get to where we are today? And so I started making a list of words. And so we learned 3 last week.
Right.
We talked about, and let's review those. We talked about we got to learn.
Learn.
And what was the other ones?
Time and talk. Learn,
time, and talk. The idea of learning is we have to continue to learn and grow in a marriage.
Yes.
And if you're listening to us and you're getting on up there in years and you've been married for 50 years, don't stop learning and growing. Nobody's arrived. Every season of life brings new opportunities for growth, for learning and advancing.
Yes.
And it always takes time. A marriage always takes time. It always does. You've got to spend time writing love letters, planning, working through challenges. Time is really essential. And then the word talk. And we have to talk about our differences, our difficulties, our hurts, our pains, our blessings, and our families, our children, what we're going to do, what we're not going to do, why we're going to do it, how we're going to do it.
Yes.
And the list goes on and on and on.
Absolutely.
And so that's where we were last week. And so we want to just remind you of that, learning, time, and talk. And let's throw out 4 more today. I think we can get them all done today. And here is the 4th one. How do you turn 30 years into a great marriage? Number 4
is the word solve.
You have to solve every issue in your marriage.
Right.
And you know what? The thing about solving issues in a marriage, it's never fun.
No.
There's nothing about solving issues that anybody likes. And yet there's a sense in which if you solve issues long enough in your marriage, there comes a day you can look back at them and smile and chuckle and even laugh at each other over those challenges that you went through in your marriage.
Some of the disagreements, but also I was thinking you'll be glad that you did.
Yes.
Because one of the things that happens with difficulties in marriage, if they are not taken care of, they tend to compound. And sadly, we have met couples who have been married a long time, and as believers, they just stick it out together because they have to, but they are not happy because the difficulties in their marriage, either someone decided that there was nothing else for them to learn, or someone decided they didn't want to take the time, or someone decided they didn't want to talk it out, and so they didn't solve the problem, and the problems have just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger.
And all of us have this issue of anger and bitterness and frustrations and irritations. And husbands, listen to the Bible in Colossians 3. He says, husbands, love your wives and be not not bitter against them. And what a reminder there that one of the ways we have to have a happy marriage is we have to solve issues like bitterness, like anger, like resentment, like envy, like frustrations, disagreements.
Yes.
And if there's one thing I think the Lord has helped us with, and I feel that you would agree about this, the Lord has helped us to solve issues as they've come up in our marriage.
Right.
And doesn't mean they've ever been easy.
No.
But God has helped us. And probably the best way we've solved the issues of our marriage is just simply by communication.
Yes.
As if we've had a disagreement, if there was an issue that came up, Bethany and I learned in our marriage that we've got to stop. We've got to talk it through. We've got to listen to each other. We've got to hear each other's viewpoint. We've got to try to understand each other, and we have to resolve the problem.
Right. I was just thinking the first three that we talked about last week in last week's episode, learning and time and talking, all of those are present when it comes to solving.
Yes,
because there
is.
might be an issue that you're like, we don't know how to solve this. So what do? You find a godly older couple that you can go to, maybe your pastor and wife, or maybe another couple in your church, or maybe a couple that you know of that you could get on the phone and say, hey, can you help us with this?
Absolutely.
So you learn, but it always is going to take time. And sometimes those issues in marriage, they come up at a really bad time. And so you just have to schedule a time and say, you know what? We can't talk about this right now. Let's talk about it this afternoon, or let's talk about it this evening. And then it always does take talking.
Yes. And for Beth and me, sometimes the issues that came up in our marriage were either normal to life, meaning maybe it was a season, a season of, a change, or, babies or pregnancy. But oftentimes it was busy times. During a busy time, we haven't connected as much as we should have. And the result of that is that, maybe one of us gets our feelings hurt, or there's a misunderstanding.
Right.
Or we, just didn't feel like something was fair. And yet what we learn through all of that is that if we take the time, and it's always inconvenient because it's not at an easy time.
Right.
And oh my goodness, we really are barely surviving anyway. Just barely surviving. And now we have to take the time out of this busy life and solve this issue.
Yes.
And yet it is the key to a happy marriage. And we've learned to listen to each other, talk about it, listen to each other, and keep talking about it and keep listening to each other until we fully understand and are able to say, okay, here's what happened. This is what was wrong. Will you forgive? Yes, I do.
Right.
And at that point, the situation is resolved. Yes. And that's always vital. And sometimes couples can get into issues where they have a situation that they're not able to resolve on their own. You just can't solve it. You've tried. Keeps coming up. Maybe it's because of a sin problem, or maybe it's because of a season of life, or a major misunderstanding that can go back some time. And in those situations, you need counsel.
Yes.
Because you've got to do whatever you have to solve the problems of your marriage, whether that means meeting with someone, or just having a conversation yourself, or finding a book that addresses the issue that you're dealing with and facing.
Right.
That has been a major issue, I feel like, in our marriage. We have worked hard at solving things, and as we've done that, it has made our marriage really grateful. And I'm really thankful for that.
I am too, that we have taken the time to sit down and talk things out. And like you said, sometimes it's just not a convenient time. And sometimes we just have to stop things and give the kids something to do so that we can have a conversation. So,
I was listening, I mentioned on our last podcast, I was listening to the divorce lawyer from New York City talk about his book that he's written.
Right.
And as I was listening to him, he said one of the things he talked about was that in his particular line of work, there's attorney-client privilege.
Yes.
And he has to just get into the dirt of, finding out your marriage is coming to an end, and who's going to get what, and how are we going to handle things. And one of the things he talked about there was that in every one of those situations, there is something that wasn't solved. There was something that was going on that didn't get communicated, that didn't get worked through. And what a reminder for us that all of us, if we're going to have a happy marriage, have to solve problems in our marriage.
Right. And while they're small.
Absolutely. Any further thought before we leave that one?
I don't think so. We have other episodes that you can look back and see.
Conflict resolution.
Yep, the conflict resolution series.
Learn how to solve conflicts in your marriage. And if you'll do that, It really is a major enhancement to a happy marriage.
Absolutely.
And we highly recommend it. Here's another word. We talked about learning, and we talked about time and talk, and today's solve. And here's the next word.
Love.
It's the word love.
Yes.
Now, what does that word mean to you?
Oh, my goodness. Well, loving someone is a joy and a privilege. It is an amazing thing to be married to your best friend, someone that you know is taking the time to invest and is learning right along with you and is willing to solve problems. And that just makes it easy to love. But love is something that has to be, I think we've talked about this before, it has to be sustained. It's not something that's just going to automatically build just because, oh, we fell in love together and we've heard that love just gets better and better. Well, it does, but you have to work on it. You have to put the time and the investment in it. And also it has to be, I think, stated, and it has to be shown. So that's what love means to me.
Yes. And I was reading the other day on social media a comment by our friend Bill Prater. And Pastor Prater, Evangelist Prater now, Brother Prater said that love is a verb more than a noun. It can be a noun.
Yes.
And he said one of the problems in marriage is that most people think of love as a noun.
Right.
That, oh, wow, we fell in love, and they look at it as, oh, there's this thing called love, and it's just so amazing. And then, oh, my goodness, it's gone.
Oh, yes.
And what he said was that you have to approach love as a verb.
Right.
It is something you do. You have to invest. You have to strengthen. You have to show it. You have to sustain it.
Yes.
And I've said this many times in our counseling sessions as well as our conferences that if you feel as if we're not really in love anymore, almost always you can trace that back to the fact that you stopped doing the things that made you feel in love to begin with.
Right.
And when you stop doing the very things that made you feel in love to begin with, then your marriage is not going to be what it ought to be.
Right.
And I've always appreciated the fact that we've worked at this.
Yes.
And it's made our marriage something great. We've always been unashamed to say, I love you.
Right.
And we say that frequently. We try to say it anytime we're saying goodbye. If we're just running to the store, we always try to say, I love you. We text it. We say it before we go to sleep. We continually work at saying, I love you, and we sustain it.
Yes.
The idea of learning, when you're learning together, that's loving.
It is.
And when you're sitting and talking, you're showing love.
Right.
And all the things that we do for each other is about love. If when a husband buys his wife flowers because she loves flowers, what's he doing? He's showing her he loves her.
Right.
And when Bethlie makes some special meal that she knows especially, dear to me or something I really, really like, what's she doing? She's showing love.
Right.
And we do live in a world, I feel like we live in a world where there's a lot of people that don't feel loved because love is not shown today.
That's true.
A lot of teenagers don't feel loved.
Right.
And it's so easy in the midst of our busy world not to show love. But it has to be shown.
But I also think in our world, we are so focused on no one loves me. We are just so focused on the selfish part of it, and we are not being selfless in our love. And one of the things about loving and being loved is that it's kind of reciprocal. When I show love to David, he shows love right back to me. There is that reciprocal feeling of love and the reciprocal showing of love. And so if you are selfless in your love, maybe you're a wife and you think, I just don't feel love from my husband. He's not romantic, or he doesn't buy me flowers, or he doesn't take me out to eat, or whatever. Are you showing love to him? Are you speaking his love language, to borrow the title of a book by Dr. Chapman? Are you showing love to him? Because often there's just sometimes a pattern in a marriage of, well, I don't feel loved, and then he doesn't feel loved, and she doesn't feel loved, and no one's doing anything to show love. So maybe you should be the spouse who today says, you know what, I'm going to show love to my spouse. I'm going to do something that I know that they love and show love to them. And often that becomes then that cycle of love in your marriage.
And I would also add to this idea of love. One of the things that Beth and I have done is we have occasionally solved conflicts simply by appealing to love.
Right.
Because there are times in our marriage where we're just not seeing it. I mean, I know that something's bothering her. She knows that something's bothering me. And Beth and I have times in our marriage where we've just not been able to resolve it.
Right.
And we're both still a little put out, or as my mom used to say, up a miffed tree, whatever that means. And there's just still this issue. And sometimes we've learned this to say, you know what, I don't know what the issue is, but here's what we do know.
Right.
I love you, and nothing's going to change that.
Yes.
And yes, I love you too. And can we just stop discussing it and just say, okay, we didn't see this eye to eye. I'm sorry. We don't even know what the issue is, but I'm sorry. I forgive you. Do you forgive me? Yes. Do we love each other? Absolutely we do. And what I've learned is that appealing to love, when our love is louder than any argument or disagreement, when we solve our conflicts by appealing to love, what we found out is it wasn't so much at that point who's right or, how to figure out all the details of the issue.
Right.
It's just a matter of going back to the fact that we're secure in the fact that we love each other.
Yes.
And you have to make that happen. And if you're young in your marriage, work at being really sweet and in love.
Yes.
And if you're middle-aged in your marriage, work at being really sweet and in love.
Yes.
And if you're getting older, stay in love, stay in love, stay in love. And it's entirely fine. It's just entirely fine to keep loving each other. You have to say it. You have to show it. You have to sustain it. What else would we add to love?
Well, you guys know what shows love to each other. What shows love to David and I may not be what shows love in your marriage. So you have to, that's one of the words that we've learned already, is learn each other. What shows love to your wife? What shows love to your husband? And that's the love language you should be speaking. You know what? It may be important to David and I that we have our time every day, that we sit down and have our tea and coffee and we have our time to talk, and that's that quality time that shows love to one another. Maybe that doesn't show love to your spouse. And so you may try all day long to just get together and have quality time, but really what they want you to do is do some act of service for them, and that really will show love. So just learning what that love language is and then doing that.
Yeah, and the wonderful passage in 1 Corinthians 13 is about love and how that it's kind and it's not envious and it's not easily provoked and it's not selfish. And it's so easy in our culture to think, well, my needs aren't being met and therefore I'm quitting. Right. And yet real love continues to be shown. Real love continues to be said. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to have a happy marriage, one of the things we've learned is that love is a vital word.
Yes, it is.
And maybe you weren't even raised, maybe, saying I love you, it's just not you. But you know what? It's a good thing for you to work on.
Right.
And you ought to practice it. You ought to work at it. You ought to learn to say it. Your spouse needs to know that you love and that love is important to you.
It is.
We have time for two more words.
Okay.
And let's wrap up this little 2-part series here about turning 30 years into a great marriage. Mm-hmm. How about the word commitment?
Yes.
That has been a huge word.
It is.
No matter what's happened in our marriage, I have always been secure in the fact that you were committed to our marriage.
Absolutely.
And that's been my goal for you to know I'm committed and we are all in this together. And, commitment looks like different things, especially depending on where you are in a marriage. A commitment, is to God. Certainly, we're committed to God. You and I are committed to each other. We're committed to our family. We're committed to serving God together.
Right.
A commitment's a huge word for our marriage.
It is.
That's why we lived in an RV for, full time 16 or 17 years.
Right.
And still do a great portion of the year in our ministry.
Right.
It's why we homeschool the children. We were committed to them becoming disciples of Christ and learning how to walk with Him and love Him. There were so many things that went into our commitment. When it came to each other, though, there's a security and commitment to know that, if I'm a little bit out of shape today, she's still committed to me.
Absolutely.
And no matter what happens, we're still in this together.
Right.
And if we don't see eye to eye because, Bethlie's wrong about something, then we still just are committed.
Right.
And as you get older, you'll often hear the story of a couple that, she's, getting Alzheimer's or, he has dementia. And there comes a time in some marriages where an older couple, one doesn't even know the other's name.
Right.
And yet they stay together and there's gentleness, there's care, there's love. You really see the wedding vows taking place there in real life, for better, for worse, in sickness as well as in health.
Right.
And that's the word commitment. And it's an important word.
It is.
What would you add to this word commitment?
I would say just in our culture at large, but even the culture in the church, there may be this underlying insecurity of, are we really committed to one another? And not really even knowing what that looks like, because the culture at large does not show us, by and large, what a committed faithful, loving marriage looks like. And so for all of you young people who maybe you're single and listening, or maybe you're a young couple and you're listening and you think to yourself, I don't even really know what that looks like. It's hard for me to wrap my heart and my mind around, I'm going to be with this person for the next 30 years, even though there are some things about them that bug the life out of me. You can learn that. It's something that you learn by, first of all, being committed to the Lord Jesus Christ and to reading the Word of God and learning from that. It is also something that you can learn from those older couples. We talked about that in the last episode. Getting with those couples who are further down the road and saying to them, how did you stay committed? And not just committed, okay, I'm going to put up with you for the next 50 years, but committed to a loving, happy, flourishing relationship. So don't be scared of the word commitment. I think in our culture, it just seems like too much. Young couples are like, that's just too much for me to even think about. Or there may be young couples that go into it thinking, well, this is no big deal to be committed. And then 5 years down the road, something happens in a season of marriage, whether it be a loss or maybe some financial difficulties or a job that's not going well or a ministry that's falling apart. And you think to yourself, okay, can we be committed through this, even though the husband sees things differently than the wife? So instead of blindly going through thinking, of course we're going to be committed, what's going to happen? Knowing, you know what, no matter what happens, we are going to be committed and we can learn that.
That's very good. And when it comes to commitment too, as you were sharing that there, I was thinking, commitment is probably the word loyalty.
Yes.
It's that I'm going to be loyal. And I think in our generation, one of the weird things that in all the studies that I've done, one of the weird things that shows up is that couples who live together prior to getting married, their rate of divorce is always higher than any other person. And there's a ton of people trying to figure out why that is. Why is it that people living together, they're sexually active with each other outside of marriage? They're not committed
right
to to a marriage relationship. They're just they're living together, and yet when they do finally commit, their marriage is damaged such a way that they almost never survive the marriage.
Right.
And I think it goes back to the fact that marriage is a commitment itself.
It is.
And part of that, when I am willing to say, you know what, I pledge to you the rest of my life.
Yes.
For better, for worse, sickness, health, richer, poorer. That is a powerful word. Commitment is a powerful word.
It is.
And if you're going through a challenging time in your marriage, maybe one of the things you should do is reaffirm your commitment. I mean, maybe just yourself to say, you know what, I'm committed and I'm staying. And maybe the two of you need to say it to each other. I know things are not well, and maybe you're separated. Things are not well, we're separated, but I'm committed because I made a vow, I made a promise. Right. And maybe you've made mistakes, and maybe the reason you're separated or you're on the edge of divorce is that you have really blown it.
Right.
Well, it's time to reevaluate your commitment and just say, hey, I've blown it. As long as you're willing, I'm committed.
Yes.
And I've got to make changes. Humility, I'm humbling myself. I was wrong. I need to make changes. I know it. Right. Will you be patient with me? Will you stay committed to me to allow me to overcome this?
Right.
Commitment is a great word.
It is.
And it does bring us to the last word. And so before we run out of time today, the last word, it's been in my heart a lot over the last few days. It's the word care. The word care.
Right.
As I was listening to the podcast on Art of Manliness the other day, one of the things the author said was that when marriages fall apart, it's usually because there's a point in which people stop caring. And about the little things. It's caring about the little things. On our walk the other morning, I shared with Bethlie that one of the things that was talked about on that podcast was a lady that came to his office. Here's a divorce attorney. She comes to his office, and she says, I know my marriage is over. And, there's no doubt it's over. Our marriage is done. And his question was, okay, well, how do you know? And she told a story about granola. There's this granola she likes for breakfast, and her husband had always made sure she had that. When it was getting low, he would bring her some more home. It's a special kind that had to be picked up at a specialty store. But for all the years of their marriage, he has always made sure she had that. And over recent months, as things have not been going well in the marriage, there came a point in which she ran out of the granola and he never replaced it. And there's almost a sense in which that is like, seriously, granola?
Right.
But what it indicates is that somewhere there, the caring had stopped.
Right.
And in every situation of life for 30 years, Beth and I have cared for one another. If we were, expecting a baby, going through all the changes that comes into a life, into a home when, the wife is pregnant and sick or morning sickness, all that, we care for each other.
Right.
And there were times when, ministry went through challenges. There's been several ministries that we've been partners with where there was a separation. Those were hard times.
Right.
But we got through those times because I knew that Bethlie cared for me. Even at times when I felt maybe somebody else did not care for me, Bethlie did. The care is an essential word.
It is.
What would you, add to that? You always give a practical thought, for our audience.
I would just say caring for one another is a concern for one another. And sometimes we take a very selfish view of one another. Maybe your husband comes in and shares about his day, and you're thinking in your heart, your day was nothing like my day because I have had, and you can name all of the things that happened in your day to make it more stressful than your husband's day, in your opinion. But a couple who is committed to one another and who is loving one another is going to ask the Lord just to help them to have care and concern for one another. When David expresses to me, you know what, this is bothering me, or I'm not sure about this situation, I'm praying this through. Well, I can have care and concern for that, and I can pray with him for that, and I can talk with him about that, and I can express concern. I can say, you know what, I'm sorry that happened. I was just in the grocery store today, and there was an older couple, and they just happened to be like almost every aisle I went down, this older couple, and you could tell that the husband in the relationship, that probably he's just getting to a point where it's more difficult for him to get around. I couldn't tell that he had dementia or anything like that, but maybe he is starting down that road a little bit. Anyway, and they just stuck together. He just kind of walked right along with her, and she would put things in the cart. And I thought, well, this is really sweet. Well, I got to the last aisle, and I was getting some shredded cheese, and she was parked by the cheese also. And he was going back down the aisle to get something that was further back. And she kind of yelled and said, no, it's not on the left side. It's on the right side. Go down a little farther. And then she looked at me and she said, he is driving me insane. And I thought, I was so taken aback. I thought, okay, for about 6 grocery aisles, I've been thinking, wow, you guys are really sweet. He's just sticking right with you, and it's obvious that it's hard for him to get around, and you're caring for him. And then I get here to the end, and obviously you are not as concerned for him as I thought.
That's hilarious.
And you're not caring for him. And I also thought, how sad.
Absolutely
I don't know
sad.
how long they've been married at all, but it is obviously getting to a point where he really needs her care. And instead of her stepping up and saying, you know what, I am committed to you. I'm going to learn in this season of life. I'm going to take time for you, and I'm going to love you, and I'm going to care for you no matter what happens. You can just from her statement and her vocal tone and her facial expression, she was fed up and she was done.
Yeah. And maybe that was just a moment of irritation, but it also may be a heart. And that's a big deal.
It is.
So here's what Bethlie and I are trying to say to you. We're trying to tell you that, having a wonderful marriage is awesome. And for 30 years, we've had a great marriage. We've had things to work through. We've grown through a lot of things together. But here are the words that have made our marriage just something amazing. And it's the word learn. We learned a lot. It's the word time. We put a lot of time into it. We talked and talked and talked. It was the word solve. We learned to resolve, to solve every situation. It's the word love.
Yes.
It's the word commitment. It's the word care.
Yes.
And I hope you'll take these. And we just wanted to share, those are simple. We could probably speak on each of those for hours, but those are just simple, a reminder of how a marriage can be really great. And it's really not that difficult if you'll put the investment into that marriage.
Absolutely.
Now we're at the end today, and we want to just give you a heads up. Coming up here in a couple of weeks, over the next coming weeks, we've got just several new little podcasts we're going to throw out, just episodes here and there.
Single episodes.
We're going to talk about empty nesters.
Yes.
How do you succeed in the time of life called empty nest? We're going to talk about training children to sit in church and just some real practical things along that line. And I hope you'll look forward to it. I hope you'll join it. Look, if you enjoy the Keeping It Young and you feel like it's a help to you, maybe share it with someone else where it can help them.
Right.
Let someone know about it. go on Spotify and those type places where you listen to us. And if you're able to, leave us a rating,
Yes.
leave us a comment. We would love for that. And of course, as we've always said, if we can help you in some way personally, reach out to us via social media or via our website, keepingityoungpodcast.com.
Yes.
And we would love to hear from you. We are always happy to hear from you. Well, we're out of time. And thanks for joining us today. This is Keeping It Young. And this week, we hope you will serve the Lord with gladness.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 media production.